Yesterday, Rashi made it a point that the Torah, normally when you identify a person by pedigree, you only mention the father. And here the Torah mentions not only Besuel, the father of Rivka, it even mentions her brother, Lavan, Achos Lavan, and also the community, Padan Aram. So Rashi cited the Midrash, the Chazal, that although her father was a Russia, although her brother was a Russia, although the community were showing Lagid Shvocha Shel Rivka, to speak about the praiseworthiness of Rivka, Shalom Maseim, she didn't learn from their ways. That's where the Torah is adding all this extra information, because it's integral for us to appreciate who Rivka is. Shalom Maseim, she didn't learn from their ways. I mentioned that the Gemara tells us that when you marry a woman, you're supposed to check the behavior, the characteristics of the brothers of the wife. Why? Because children very often assume the characteristics of the brothers of the mother. So if you want to understand where it may be going by seeing the behavior patterns or the characteristics of the brothers, you understand what you're getting involved in. And that's why the Torah tells us that Aaron, he married Elisheva Bas Aminodov Achos Nachshon. Elisheva, the daughter of Bas Aminodov, the sister of Nachshon. What does Torah have to tell us? She was the sister of Nachshon. Nachshon was the prince of the tribe of Judah. To tell us this point, that since Nachshon was so special, that's why Aaron had special sons. Because Rov Acheim Holchem, Rov Bonim Holchem Acheim. Okay, that's that. So over here, you would think that Rav Kalatsky points out, having a brother like Lavan, understanding what the man is, there's no question you stay away from this. So the answer is because the Rav Kalatsky, despite that, Yitzchak took her as a wife because he had no choice. There was nobody in the world who was more qualified to be the matriarch than Rivka Imenu. That's what he says. Besides, we had said that after the Akedah, Avram Avinu was communicated to him through Ruach HaKodesh that Yitzchak's Zivug was born, Rivka, so he knew that's what Hashem wants, that she's the destined wife, the future matriarch of Klal Yisrael. That's Chazal. So despite the fact is that she had such a brother, you marry her, what's going to be? It's like the Gemara tells us by Shishyo Melch Yehuda that he was on his deathbed, and Yeshaya Navi comes to explain it to him that the reason why he's on his deathbed and he's dying is because he didn't engage in procreation. So he says, why didn't you? So he says, because I saw through my divine vision that I'm going to have a son who's going to be evil. That's the reason why not. So Shaya says to Chishyo Melch Yehuda, don't get involved in the hidden secrets of God. If that's you have to raise your child appropriately. What's going to be, that's God's business. That's not your business. And therefore, he married his woman, and he had that son. Menashe was one of the most evil kings. That was the son of Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda, was the tzaddik. His father was a person who was considered to be Mashiach. Same thing here. It's Achos Lavan. There's a chance you may have a child who's going to be a monster within the spiritual realm. But that's the will of Hashem, because it was communicated to Avram at Akedah that Rivka is the destined Zivug mate for Yitzchak. Okay? That's the Or Chaim HaKadosh. But he says something interesting over here. Another reason why I mention is Achos Lavan, because immediately the Torah tells us that Yitzchak prayed for Rivka because she was Akara, she was barren. So the Chaim HaKadosh explains, Od Romas Bodos Achos Lavan Der Homrom Shtam Rivka Shois Akara. He brings a Chazal. Why was Rivka an Akara? The Tzad Birchos Lavan, because she received the blessing from Lavan before she had departed. He says you should be into the multitudes, you should conquer the gates of your enemies, and so on and so forth. That was the bracha Lavan and his mother had given to Rivka before she departed with Eliezer. They shlo yireh ki berchoso taseh maseh tov. that you shouldn't consider for a moment that the bracha of this Russia could bring about anything good. Before the Torah tells us that she was barren, what does it tell us? You know who she was. She was a sister of Lavan. And then it tells us she was barren. So we're linking the reason why she's barren is because she's the sister of Lavan. That the reason why Rivka was an Torah was because she received the bracha from her brother. And Klal Yisrael, their development and their evolution should not be in any way attributed to the bracha of Lavan was a Russia. Very famous Orach Chaim HaKodesh. So it's interesting. We've seen the Medrash points out that we find that all the matriarchs, they were barren. Sari Mena was barren. Only through a miracle she was able. The whole story with the Malachim. Then we find Rivka's barren, Rachel, and Leah were barren. They were all barren. So why were they all barren? So the Medrash tells us in this week's parsha, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu misaved letfilos shel tzadikim. Because Hashem desires the tefillah of tzadikim. Because when a tzaddik prays, what is it analogous to? A stranger comes and knocks on your door once. Okay, you acknowledge him. But if he comes too often, you say, it's enough. But if an intimate friend comes, you want to encourage him that he should come continuously. So what do? You create a situation where he needs you. So as a result of that, every day he's coming to you. And the Medrash uses this marshal, this analogy regarding the mun. The mun every day in the desert fell. Only the equivalent of what was needed for the day. And every day would fall. Hashem could have given him a week's worth of man, a month's worth of man. Why every day? Because Hashem wanted to deal with Klal Yisrael every single day. Because since he had that special relationship, it's like a son. You give your son a year's allowance. When does he get back to you? 2 weeks before the year is up, he calls you up, you got to refill the account. Put money more in the account. But if the father wants a son to have the relationship, he says, every day come for your daily allowance. So the son says, why can't you give me? What do I have to come every day? Because the father says, because I want to see every day. Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to be involved with Klal Yisrael every day. That's an exhibition of his love that he has for us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu misaved b'tfilos shel tzadikim. Tefillah is you have an audience with Hashem. Hashem wants his most beloved to come and have an audience with him every day and make that request. Therefore, that's the reason why all the matriarchs were barren for that reason. And the husbands, they prayed, besides themselves, they prayed to have children, which is not what we're saying now. It's not because ki akori. The akori here is because this is connected to the bracha that Lavan had given to Rivka. And we don't want in any way that it should be attributed to what? To the bracha of Russia. The parsha says Avram holed es Yitzchak. So Rashi cites one interpretation that when was he able to father Yitzchak? Only after he had the hay added to his name. Yitzchak is Ben Avram. But when was Avram capable to father Yitzchak? When he became Avraham, which was what? When he became circumcised. He had the name changed from Avram to Avraham. And as a result of that, now he was able to father Yitzchak. So we explained, we once mentioned a Medrash. The Medrash says, the Gemara in 2 locations tells us, there's a pasuk in Tehillim where David Melech says, Ki b'koach Hashem tzur olamim. With the letters Yud Hey, which is one of the names of Hashem, God formed the worlds. So the Gemara tells us, with the spirituality within the letter Yud, Hashem created Olam Haba, the spiritual world. And within the spirituality of Hey, he created the physical world. Kibet Ko, with Yud Hey, Tzur Olamim. He formed the worlds. Olam Hazen, Olam Haba. That's what it says. So the world came about as a result of the spirituality letter of Hey. So the Medrash tells us that when Hashem added the letter Hey to Avram's name, he said to Avram, what it took to create the whole world, for you to be able to father the future patriarch of Klal Yisrael, and for you to be the founding patriarch of Klal Yisrael, what it takes the equivalent of creating the whole world. So the Hey, it's not just adding a letter, renaming it. All the energies that were needed to bring about existence, those identical energies were needed to bring about Avram to be a new being, to be able to launch, to set a dynamic called Klal Yisrael. And that's very good with the Chazal. The Medrash tells us at the beginning of creation says, Behi Boram. He created them. Behi Boram. So the Medrash says, Behi Boram, Osis Avram. The word Hiboram are the same letters as Avram Avinu. So the Maral of Prague explains that Avram was not a continuum of the previous creation. Avram was the beginning, was an ex nihilo within the spiritual realm, that what he represented didn't pre-exist his own existence. He was the beginning of a new existence. As a result of that, Klal Yisrael being that, who did Avram have to be when he fathered Yitzchak? He had to be another being. He was not part of the realm of creation, the original creation. That's Behi Boram. Therefore, we needed the Hey. As a result of that, every one of even though Avram was the son of Terach, that's good enough for Yishmael to be the father of Yishmael. Avram was the father of Yishmael. Avraham, that's Yitzchak. Klal Yisrael being a different realm of existence, which not precede that moment, he had to be a different being to become that. Sari Menu, who was the daughter of Haran, Avram's brother. She was a granddaughter of Terach. She was Akora. She physically, humanly, she could not have a child. It's only through miracle. So how was Yitzchak? Why did she conceive Yitzchak? She's Akora? Impossible. It was a what? It was a miracle. Rivka made him. She's the daughter of Besuel. She has the same pedigree as Lavan. How was she able to have a child? She's an Akara, a miracle. Rachel and Leah, the daughters of Lavan, the same evil pedigree. How were they able to have children? To conceive from Yaakov. Yaakov wasn't the problem. He's the grandson of Avram, the son of Yitzchak. They're part of that spiritual realm. But what about Rachel and Leah? How were the Shvatim? How the Shiftei Koch? How were they conceived? Miracle. Akora. Both of them Akora. The Yiftach Hashem es Rachma. Hashem opened their wombs. They were able to conceive. It's only because that to indicate and emphasize this point, they're not part of that original creation. They're part of this new creation. We find that, point to one interpretation, when Yaakov was born, who named Yaakov? Hashem named Yaakov. Levi, Rashi over there says, he was called Levi. By the others, the matriarchs, they called their children by the names. Levi, it says, he was called Levi. So Rashi cites Chazal over there, that when he was born, Gabriel had taken Levi before Hashem, and Hashem named him Levi. Levi representing the Kohanim, the most spiritual of the 12 tribes, he was named. What is name? Name is always the destiny of a person. Even though the Rachaim HaKadosh points out that the only relevance we have to Nevuot till today is when we name a child, because the name always indicates the destiny of the child, of a person. And Hashem puts the name in the person's mind, the parents, that you choose that name because that's the destiny. It's based on the pasuk, which the Gemara Brachos cites. But when it came to naming Yaakov, who's the most special of the patriarchs, Hashem himself named Yaakov. Hashem himself named Levi. Amram, Moshe Rabbeinu, Mila Hashem Eli, Temed Egel. Who was the only tribe who did not participate in the Chet Egel? It was Levi. The only tribe that was not involved, who was not part of the bondage. They were not subjugated. It was Levi. Levi initially had a whole different dimension of value. Of course, there's Bechira, there's choice, but nevertheless, he was like the upper echelon of the structure of the spiritual structure of Klal Yisrael. That's Levi. Yeah, that the Gemara says at the end of Shabbos that we find that Yaakov fathered the 12 tribes. which are referred to as Shiftei God, the tribes of God. As a result of the Chet of Adam Rishon and the Nachash, the serpent, who the Chazal tell us actually he had come upon Chava and he infused her within her a spiritual pollution, the impurity. It's called Zuama. Zuama refers to the spiritual impurity. And the Gemara tells us that Avram, as great as he was, introduced monotheism into the world. The founding patriarch of Klal Yisrael, he had Zuama. He still had this impurity. How do we see it? Because we see he fathered Yishmael. Yishmael was a manifestation of that spiritual impurity. Yitzhak still was tinged with that Zuama, because we see Yitzhak had Esav. Esav was an expression of that impurity. Of course, Esav still had free choice. That he chose to become what he became, that was his choice. But he had a stronger inclination. He was more inclined to that because he was the expression of the impurity of Yitzhak. Yaakov, through his own development and choices, he expunged and he extracted all that Zuama. And what's the confirmation on that? He fathered Shiftei Koh. All his children were tzaddikim. And therefore they're referred to as Shiftei Koh. No longer had Zuama. Yaakov was the one who was able to achieve that. And that's the reason why Yaakov is considered Bechir Shabavos. He's the most perfect. He's the chosen of the what? Of the patriarchs. That's Yaakov Avinu. So even though we're saying that the characteristics of the children take after the mother, we're talking that's the characteristics. Lavan was the most extreme level of a charlatan. He was a Ramai. If you take a look at the Baal HaTurim over here, it's called Lavan HaRami. So the Baal HaTurim says it's the same letters as Ramai. He was a deceiver. He was a charlatan. Esav outpaced Lavan endless times. We find that by Bris Bein Absorim, Hashem said to Avram, you should take certain species, animals, cut them in half, and then it says, the Torah v'gozim, and take a turtle dove, the Yonah, which is Klal Yisrael, the gozim. Gozil is the pigeon. Gozil. And it says the others he cut in half. The last two were not cut in half, the birds. So who's Torah? Torah is Klal Yisrael. That's the Yonah. Who's Gozil? Gozil is Edom. Gozil is the Edomites. Esav. Why? Shegozlin das habrios. Because they have an ability to deceive people at a point that you can't read them. It's nearly impossible to read them. We're going to see in a moment that when Rivka was pregnant and she had this difficulty, she thought she was going to die during the pregnancy because she had this agitation in the womb. She went to get a reading, a spiritual reading. She went to Shem. And he said, Shnei goyim b'vitnech. And when they emerge from your womb, each one's going in his direction. One is going to be a representation of Kedusha, and the other one's going to be the counterbalance of evil. That's the future of these two children that are going to be born. That's Yaakov and Esav. The only reason why Rivka knew who Esav was, because she had a spiritual reading on him. Chazal tells, if not for that, Esav's guile was at a level, it was impossible to even know, to detect who he really was. We find that his father says, why did he love Esav? Ki tzayid b'fiv. Tzayid. So one interpretation we'll see in a moment, Rashi cites, Shetzod aviv b'fiv. He entrapped his father through his words. His words, he was able to save his father. Yitzhak was a very accomplished person. He had senses. With all his senses, he could not detect who Esav was. Because it's sad of the fifth. Rivka, how did she know? She was the sister of Lavan. She was brought up in that environment. The only reason why she knew is only because Shem which was a divine connection. That's how she knew. But she never shared it with her husband. I was just thinking as we're talking, Kitzayid Befiv. He entrapped his father with his words, with his mouth. The Gemara tells us that when a person studies Torah, he has to articulate it, he has to verbalize the words. The Gemara tells the story that there was this person, the student studying, and he wasn't verbalizing the words, articulating the words. So Bruria, the wife of Hermea, goes over and admonishes him. He says, don't you realize you're wasting your time? You're wasting your time. Because the pasuk says, Ki chaim heim lemotzoehem. When you study Torah, it gives you life only when you actually articulate it. If you say the words, that's when it has the impact on you. But if you don't verbalize it, it doesn't have that effect. So therefore, you're doing a disservice to yourself. Chaim lemotzoehem. Now it's interesting. Yitzchak gave the bracha to Yitzchak, to Yaakov. Hakol kol Yaakov yadayim de'esav. The voice is the voice of Yaakov, and the hands are the hands of Esav. So what's the voice of Yaakov? So Chazal tells that's tefillah and that's Torah. That's the kol. Tefillah, you have to verbalize, you have to articulate it, and Torah has to be, as we're quoting the pasuk, chaim motzeim. Now, who is the counterbalance to Yaakov? Esav. The power of speech, where did he invest it in? Kitzai Befiv. Speech originally was given to mankind for the ultimate objective of bringing the world to its level of perfection through the study of Torah. Bereshis bara Elokim, b'shul Torah shenikras reishis, b'shul Yisrael shenikras reishis. So it was given for Torah. That's the objective. The only people who have realms through are Klal Yisrael. That's through the study of Torah and the observance of the Torah. But Talmud Torah keneged kulam. The ultimate mitzvah is the study of Torah. And how do you study Torah? With the power of speech. Articulate, that's Kol Kol Yaakov. Esav is the counterbalance of that. How does he utilize the Kol? Kitzai Befiv. He trapped his father, and that's Gozo. Gozo and Dasabrios. They go and deceive people, and it's almost impossible even to what? So the power of speech, actually, Barasi, it's a Barasi Torah Tavli. The antidote to the evil inclination is what? Is Torah. And in what form? Verbalization. That's Chaim. That gives life to the Jew. That creates that energy, that dynamic, that automatically brings a level of clarity. Kiner mitzvah Torah or. That's the Torah or. It's illumination. It illuminates when you actually articulate it and you study it properly. Esav, on the other hand, he takes that same power of speech and he creates darkness. He creates deception. He creates what we call Helam. Helam is concealment. That's Choshech. That's what Esav is. And the Medrash tells us at the beginning of Echo, famous Medrash, there were two great philosophers, and it says one is Greek name, and they came to, and they asked the question, people came to these great philosophers, they said, and one, I think one was also mentioned, Bilam, they came to Bilam and said, how do we destroy the Jews? So they said to them, go to the Botei Medrash, and go to the shuls. If you hear the sound of Torah in the Beis Medrash, and you hear the chirping of the children studying in the shuls, like in their elementary schools, you cannot, they're invincible. Because when it's a Kol Kol Yaakov, Ein HaYadayim Esav. When the voice is the voice of Yaakov, the hands are not the hands of Esav. But this Beis Medrash is silent, and you don't hear the chirping of the shuls. The children are not studying Torah. With the Kol is not Yaakov, then it's Yadayim Esav. Then the hands of Esav. Esav is able to what? To destroy you. That's the balance. Then the counterbalance. If we utilize our voice, there's Kol Yaakov, the Beis Medrash, and you hear the children studying Torah, then Ein HaYadayim Esav. But if the voice is not there, who's going to counter it? Then the voice is what? The voice of Esav. And when the voice is Esav, then the hands are the hands of Esav. Then it's Yadayim Esav. But again, we find the Chav Chaim always cites this Targum in Shmer Salosh and other locations that it says when Hashem infused Adam with the Bab of Nishmas Chaim, when he infused him with his soul, it says Vahil Nefesh Chayo. He became a living entity. So he always cites the Targum Onkelos. What's Nefesh Chayo? Ruach Menat Malolo. He became a speaking species. When he infused him with a soul, he became a speaking species. What does the speaking species have to do with that? What's the neshama? The neshama itself is spiritual. It's the only spiritual component of a human being. The outgrowth, the result of that soul was the power of speech. Why is one connected to the other, as we're explaining? Because the only way you're able to develop the neshama is only through the study of Torah. So when he was endowed with the soul, he was given the power of speech, because the speech is the tool through which you bring about that perfection. That's the Kol Yaakov. But Esav, on the other hand, who was not that special person, because all mankind was disenfranchised when Adam ate of Deitz Hadas. It is Atem Kriyim Adam. Only we're called Adam. We're that original species who's meant to bring the world to perfection. So the Kol that was endowed initially, we utilize that Kol to bring about perfection. But Edom, who's the epitome of the non-Jew, he uses that power of speech for deception, for destruction, to counter the speech of Yaakov. We find that when Yaakov fled from Lavan, he was infuriated. Lavan prides himself that he is the master of deception. Like afterwards, when he caught up with him, he says, "You cheated me 1,000 times. Whatever arrangement there was financial, you always changed it." And he confronted, he exposed him for everything he was. He was the master of deception, guile, everything else. And this person, Yaakov, we saw as this little sheepish, pure, innocent guy, goes and pulls the wool over the expert. Because it says he fled with everything, and it says he deceived Lavan. Gonav das Lavan. Lavan, you know what I mean? So when you beat the master at his game, he went mad. He was going to go and destroy Yaakov. He says, all these years you've been by me. For 20 years, you've been pulling the wool over my eyes. And I didn't even know it. What proof in the pudding? All of a sudden you pull out with all your wealth and disappear without me even being able to detect it. How? As I said, if Rivka wouldn't have known through shame who Esav was, even she being brought up in the home of her parents, loving her brother, there's no way she would have known. That's why Yitzchak couldn't pick this up. It's only because she was informed. Lavan, when did Yaakov leave the home of Lavan? Hashem comes to him, it's time to leave. Meaning till now, Yaakov behaved like Yaakov. Full faith, you do what you have to do, Hashem runs the show. Hashem dictates the world. I don't have to be concerned about Lavan. Whatever's meant to be mine is going to be mine. And that's what Yaakov said to Lavan, if not for God, I would have been left with nothing. You would have taken everything. So the only reason why he was able to make that move then was because Hashem told him to make the move. It was deception. Titin emes liYaakov. Yaakov is emes. This type of behavior is not emes. Maybe it is emes. But Yaakov, Titin emes liYaakov. He dresses, he impersonates Esav, and presents himself. But why? Because Rivka says to him, Olai kiles b'ni. He was concerned, my father will catch me, deceiving me, will curse me. She says, Olai kiles b'ni. That curse will be upon me. Why? So the Targum says, because what I'm telling you to do now is a nevuah. I have a direct communication with Hashem. You must do it now. So Yaakov, this wasn't contradictory to who he was. The only reason why he did what he did was only because who's the dictator of Hashem. Torah is emes. Emes means whatever God dictates to be truth, that's what truth is. As much as you believe differently, it doesn't make a difference. Hashem says, now's the time to take the bracha. The birthright is yours. Without you, the bracha, you cannot survive. Go take the bracha. And that's why Esau was amazed. Firstly, how did he even know what was going on? How did he understand? Even he didn't even believe that Yaakov really appreciated who he was. We find what the big showdown, when after he was coming back and he hears that Esau's coming against him with 400 men, and he prays to Hashem, he says, don't give me into the hands of Ochi Esau, my brother Esau, even though it's my brother. So the Medrash says, Esau had the power of convincing. Although Yaakov knew Esau was, he was concerned that when he's confronted, he'll make him feel so secure that he's his most intimate friend that he'll lower his defenses. And when he lowers his defenses, Esau would kill him. So he prayed to Hashem, allow me always to sense who Esau is. Although he's my brother, he'll behave like my brother, and he'll disarm me. Always allow me to know who he is, that he's Esau, that I should not let down my defenses. Because if I do, he'll kill me. You understand? Nobody knew Yaakov, Esau better than Yaakov all the years. Because he read the script due to his mother informing him. And yet, he was concerned that Esau would be able to kill him because he'll put him at ease and convince him that he's his most intimate friend. That's the power of Esau. But that's the cold. That comes through the cold. As the cold Yaakov is able to turn over the world, identically, the cold of Esau, God forbid, is able to destroy the world. But that's in the same way. That's the counterbalance. And we see the extreme level of what that counterbalance is. In Tainus explains that the study of Torah could be either Sama de Chayi or it could be Sama de Musa. It can either be the potion of life or the potion of death. If a person studies Torah as he should study Torah, it brings life. But if you use Torah, Tosa Lekanter, you study Torah as a weapon of destruction, then not only does it not enhance you, it destroys you. It destroys your spirituality. What is that? So what's Lekanter? Lekanter means a person is going to say a shir, and I prepare so I should be able to refute him and destroy him to show who he's not. So you're not studying the Torah for the Torah. You're weaponizing the Torah to destroy the other person. In that situation, the Gemara says, not only will the Torah not breathe life to you, it will destroy your spirituality. Now, the question is why? It's negative. To that degree, the Gemara says in the Megillah that Haman had solicited the decree, Lash V'Larav Labid, to annihilate every man, woman, and child. And it says when Achashverosh took off the ring and gave it to him, that empowered him to issue this decree. How did he solicit it? He comes to Achashverosh, and the Gemara says nobody could speak Lashon Hara like Haman. He was the expert in Lashon Hara. And the Gemara talks about Lashon Hara. What does he say? What's Lashon Hara? Is the power of speech. He was able to utilize the power of speech in a way that he actually enraged Achashverosh to the degree that he agreed you could destroy the Jewish people. What did he say? He says, these Jews, I want to destroy them. He says, how could you destroy them? They're still my people. They're one of my nations. And if you destroy them, we're going to have gaps. My kingdom there'll be a major gap there. He says, no. That's so intermingled among the nations, they won't even be noticed when they're missing. There are not going to be any gaps there. There are not going to be any vacuums. So he realized he lost on that one. He says, do you realize if a Jew has a fly in his wine, he takes the fly, drinks the wine. If you touch the Jew's wine, you know what he does with it? He'll pour it out and he'll smash the glass. When he heard that it was too much for him. He says, you know something? take the ring, do what you want with them. You could destroy them. And that's when he issued. So the Gemara says, Haman was an expert. Nobody could speak Lashon Hara the way Haman spoke Lashon Hara. Now, I always say, what is Lashon Hara? When you speak negatively about someone, there's a story with the Satmar Rebbe, Zechtzak Levrocha. No, the Satmar Rebbe was anti-Zionist. He loved Eretz Yisrael, he loved Jews, but Zionism, he was anti-Zionist because he believed that the foundation of Zionism is to destroy, or ultimately to destroy Torah. That's what it is. So what happened was, but it was known that Satmar Rebbe, besides being a Gadol b'Torah, he was a Baal Chesed, one of a kind. One of a kind. So somebody came to Rav Aryeh Levin, Zechat Levrocha, who was known as the rabbi of the prisoners during the War of Independence. And even the all the people fought in the War of Independence, Palmach and all these people, they were his chassidim, Rav Aryeh Levin, and they saw him as a tzaddik. So one of these people came and they heard about the Satmar Rebbe, and he wanted to unload to Rav Aryeh Levin about the Satmar Rebbe because he's anti-Israel. So, and the Rav Aryeh Levin, being a tzaddik that he was, sense was, he says, before you tell me about the Satmar Rebbe, I want to ask you a few questions. And you respond. He says, is it true that the Satmar Rebbe is a great tzaddik? That he observes the Torah meticulously? Yes. That he invests every moment of his day in serving Hashem? Yes. When it comes to chesed, will he take the shirt off his back and provide for any Jew regardless, to feed him, to educate him, whatever it is? Yes. He asked him about 20, every question was answered in the positive. Yes. After he goes and asks him all these question responses, tell me, what do you want to say about the Satmar Rebbe? He says, I have nothing to say. When a person is irked, at that moment, all you see is the negative. When you see the negative, then you buy into the negative. But if you see the total picture, it's just a small speck on the spectrum. It doesn't disrupt the picture. But a human being, if you touch him emotionally and you have him focus on that negative, it blots out everything else and you only see the negative. And that's the power of Lashon Hara. You say something negative about the person where doesn't have any constructive value, it's destructive. At that moment, all he sees is that person within that negative lens. And therefore, the person is affected by it. But what is that? Who uses the power of speech as a destructive force? Who's the counterbalance of Yaakov, the Kol? That's Esav. Haman was the epitomization of Amalek. That's who Haman was. And it says nobody could speak Lashon Hara the way Haman spoke Lashon Hara. That means he was able to use that power of speech to put Klal Yisrael in a position of ultimately total annihilation. He did not succeed. The miracle was the last moment, everything was turned around. Why? So the Gemara in Megillah cites Psukim that Mordechai, he galvanized the Jews with tefillah and they should upgrade their mitzvahs and study Torah. That's the reason why things were turned around. But again, exactly what we're talking about. Who is Amalek? Amalek, Haman, power of speech, Lashon Hara. Therefore, when you take power of speech, which was meant to bring about the ultimate level of Kedusha, if you weaponize it, not only does it use Torah as a weapon to weaponize it, the power of speech, not only does not advance you, it destroys you spiritually speaking. I've heard more pulpits, rabbis, they said things which are unconscionable about Yitzchak. Yitzchak had a problem with his shone bias. I mean, if Rivka knew the reality of Esav was, why didn't she share it all the years with her husband? And it had to come to this, that Yaakov had to deceive his brother, which created this extreme level of hate until the end of time of Esav solely the Yaakov. She should have shared it with him. And Yitzchak maybe even would have cursed him or clipped his wings. Why didn't she? Evidently, the takeaway is you can't even say it. That's how bad it is. I once heard somebody use chasush, a word. It seems to be Yitzchak was a wimp. Because you see, everybody pulled the wool over his eyes. Even his own wife didn't share with him. Now, there's a question, very basic question. Rivka is having a problem during her pregnancy. This agitation, she thinks she's going to die. Who does she go for? Get a reading? To Shem, who's a prophet. Why don't you go to Avram? Avram was a prophet. Her husband, right? Avram passed away when Esav and Yaakov were 15 years old. Before he took the wrong path. She should have gone. What's it all about? She did go. The answer is she went to Avram. Avram says, I have no idea. Because a Navi only knows what God tells him. Okay? Now, why did Avram know? Because Avram was meant to live 180 years. He had 5 years taken off his life because Hashem promised him when he passes away, he's going to pass away b'seva tova, good old age. And if he would know that Esav is going to become what he's going to become, it would have been contradictory to the promise he gave him. So Hashem took 5 years off Avram's life that he should not know who Esav is going to be. So she went to Avram. Avram says, I have no idea. Because the whole agitation had to do with who Esav is. So Hashem never communicated that to Avram. Yitzchak was a Navi. She goes to her husband. Yitzchak, what's it all about? He says, I don't know. Why did Yitzchak know what it was about? He wanted Hashem to share it with him. The answer is very simple. Because the whole concept of Esav shone Yaakov, this setting had to be placed to create the setting of the counterbalance between good and evil. So Yitzchak was denied an understanding of what was going on. But she has to get a reading. She goes to a new prophet. An old prophet. Shem gives it a reading. So if Hashem did not share it with Avram and did not share it with Yitzchak, that means when she finds out the reality of what's going on, it's clear to her, it's something she should not permit to share, not with Avram and not with her husband. So all the years you find she never ever shared with Avram, with Yitzchak, who Esav was. When we find when Yaakov fled, it's not because Esav vowed to kill Yaakov, as it says. She says, I'm disgusted with the wives of Esav. They're idolaters. I'm disgusted with my life. I can't deal with it. I don't want Yaakov to marry any of these women, the Canaanite women. So before he left, he sent him off. He says, you should marry one of the daughters of your mother's brother. So the reason why he sent him off, not because he understood his life's in jeopardy, because Rivka never shared anything negative about Esav with Yaakov, with Yitzchak, never. Because she was not permitted. It was clear from Hashem, there's something which has to remain just with her, not to get out, not go beyond her not knowing this. Obvious question. Yaakov is Ishkam Yoshiv Olim. He's a man who invests every moment of his day studying Torah. Esav is Ish Soder. He's a hunter. So if he's the hunter and the core of the Jewish people is the spirituality, it's the Torah, so of course you give the bracha to Yaakov, not to Esav. What are you giving to Esav for? Right? So the Sephardim explains that Yitzchak didn't know Esav was in Russia. He's a man of the world. He's the hunter. He's not the one who could sit 24 hours a day and study Torah. That's Yaakov. Yaakov is the most spiritual of the two. However, in Kemach and Torah, who's going to attend to all the physical needs of Yaakov? So he created the concept of Yisachar Zvulun. Esav will be the Zvulun, and Yaakov will be the Yisachar. And as Yaakov had Zvulun providing for Yisachar, they should not be distracted from Torah. Yitzchak believed Esav having that ability, valuing what Yitzchak values, could be fully dedicated to Yaakov to support him. But he didn't know he was evil. So he realized afterwards, not because he's evil, but that he shouldn't get involved to give the blessing, but rather Yaakov should be responsible himself to provide for himself. Yaakov should be a self-provider. He shouldn't have an external person providing for him. That's the way he understood his mistake. Not because Esav is a Russia, therefore he's not qualified to receive the bracha. It's not meant to be his, because the whole understanding was that he should be the one to be the support of Torah. He should be the Zvulun. He's not going to be the Zvulun. That's the will of God. Okay, that's the end of the story. But not because Esav's not qualified to be the Zvulun. That's not the reason. He should not be the Zvulun, because God doesn't want him to be. That's something Yaakov would tend to himself. So Yaakov, Yitzchak never ever knew, ever, who Esav was.